Imagine spending your entire life building a table for your family to feast at, only to find out they pulled up the chairs, ate the meal, and deliberately left you out in the cold. This is the true story of a devoted mother who gave absolutely everything to her children, only to be erased from their lives when she was no longer deemed convenient. But what her family didn't realize was that the woman they tried to make invisible was about to turn her quiet heartbreak into a masterful stroke of ultimate independence. Let me introduce you to Barbara. She is a 67-year-old woman who recently retired after dedicating 42 long years to working in the local school system. For decades, Barbara was the undisputed heartbeat of her family. She was the architect of their comfort, the one who always stepped up to organize the birthdays, the holiday dinners, and the spontaneous get-togethers. If there was a family event, Barbara was the engine running it. She spent her life putting everyone else first, sacrificing her own needs to ensure her son, Jason, and her daughter, Emily, never felt the sting of hardship, even after her husband walked out on them. From baking cookies for school fundraisers to covering the down payment on Jason's first home, Barbara gave without ever keeping a score. To make things easier for everyone, Barbara did what many generous mothers do. She opened a shared family bank account. The purpose of this fund was simple: to help with unexpected emergencies, manage group events, and provide a financial safety net for her adult children. Barbara was the sole primary account holder, but she made sure that everyone had access to the funds. She funded it with her own hard-earned money, trusting that her family would treat her generosity with the respect it deserved. She happily paid for Emily's dental surgery and Jason's college textbooks because, in her mind, that is simply what mothers do. Never in her wildest dreams could she have anticipated how that trust would be weaponized against her. The shattering of Barbara's peaceful retirement happened on an otherwise quiet Sunday afternoon. She was at home, completely unaware of the betrayal unfolding just miles away, when her neighbor, Sandy, came knocking on her door. Sandy was holding her tablet, giggling brightly about what she assumed was a wonderful family event. She casually mentioned Barbara's big old reunion, prompting a polite but highly confused smile from Barbara. Sensing the confusion, Sandy simply flipped the tablet's screen around to show her the photos. What Barbara saw on that glowing screen made her blood run cold. Right there on Facebook was a massive family reunion picnic happening at Liberty Park in Cincinnati. The scene was aggressively festive, with picnic tables decked out in bright red, white, and blue decorations. There were matching shirts, a rented food truck, and children happily running through the sprinklers. But it wasn't just a random gathering. The folding chairs were filled with her own blood relatives. She stared at the image of her son Jason with his arm wrapped around his wife. She saw her daughter Emily holding a drink, laughing joyously beside her cousins. Her 3 precious grandchildren were there, too. And to twist the knife even deeper, the group photo prominently featured her ex-husband's smug second wife. Everyone was there. Everyone except Barbara. It wasn't an oversight. They hadn't accidentally forgotten to send her an invitation. They had actively chosen not to include her. Not a single text message, not a quick phone call. Absolutely nothing was sent her way to let her know her entire family was gathering just 20 minutes from her house. But as Barbara sat at her kitchen table later that night, holding a ceramic mug of cold tea with trembling fingers, the true depth of the humiliation washed over her. The agonizing, unforgivable truth was that they had used her own money from the shared family account to fund the entire extravagant party. When Barbara tried to call Jason for an explanation, her calls went completely ignored. There was no answer, just the hollow ring of a phone being purposely avoided. When she reached out to Emily, her daughter had the audacity to text back that it wasn't a big deal. Emily casually dismissed the massive, catered event as just something thrown together last minute. But Barbara wasn't foolish. The professional food truck, the custom shirts, and the elaborate setup told a completely different story. Her children had systematically lied to her face, planned an elaborate gathering behind her back, and then attempted to gaslight her for having the natural reaction of feeling hurt. As the cold reality set in, Barbara realized she had become nothing more than a utility. They viewed her merely as the woman behind the checks, the silent fixer. As long as they needed down payments and grocery money, she was the heartbeat of the family. But the second they didn't need fixing, they erased her. They assumed they could just make decisions for her, deciding she wasn't needed and treating her as if she were already gone. She had swallowed a lot of pain in her lifetime, but looking at those photos, Barbara realized she was finally full. In the immediate aftermath of discovering the betrayal, something fundamental inside Barbara shifted. For her entire adult life, she had played the role of the ultimate peacemaker, the sacrificial mother who continuously put everyone else's needs far above her own. But looking at those vibrant Facebook photos of her family eagerly feasting at a table she had essentially built, she made a profound and immediate decision. She wasn't going to scream at them, she wasn't going to beg for their attention, and she certainly wasn't going to cry over their cruelty. Instead of an emotional outburst, Barbara embraced a chilling, methodical calm. She sat down at her computer and initiated the first step of her quiet resignation. With steady, calm fingers, she logged into the banking portal and began the process of completely closing the shared family account, confirming each prompt on the screen as casually as if she were paying her monthly utility bills. There was absolutely no drama, no warning texts sent to her children, and no grand declarations of anger. Just pure, unadulterated silence. After the account was officially closed and the funds secured, Barbara simply got up, watered her houseplants, and made herself a sandwich. She discovered a powerful truth that night. When you have been ignored and taken for granted for long enough, your inner peace eventually becomes your greatest weapon. The consequences of Barbara's silent financial strike did not take long to manifest. By the very next morning, the once quiet phone in Barbara's living room began to light up with desperate activity. It rang a total of 5 times before noon had even struck. She saw the caller IDs flash across the screen. Her son Jason, her daughter Emily, and even her niece, Kelsey, all suddenly eager to just check in. But Barbara knew better. She knew exactly why they were calling, because they had inevitably noticed the sudden financial drought. Jason, who had always been the most dependent on her quiet fixes, was the first one to finally crack and address the elephant in the room. When he called, he awkwardly tried to play the situation off as a mere technical glitch. "Mom." "Hey, weird thing," he started, explaining that the family debit card had been abruptly declined when he tried to pay for his son Leo's summer camp deposit. He asked her if she knew what was going on, his voice laced with an ingrained expectation that his mother would immediately apologize and fix the error for him. Barbara let a long, heavy pause hang on the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was light, mirroring the exact dismissive tone her daughter had used on her the night before. "Oh, I thought it wasn't a big deal," she replied smoothly, feeding Emily's exact words right back to her son. She added, "Just something thrown together last minute," directly referencing the elaborate catered reunion they had tried to downplay. The silence on Jason's end of the phone was palpable, followed swiftly by nervous stammering. He tried to pivot, insisting that the declined card wasn't about the reunion, but Barbara firmly cut through his excuses. Keeping her voice perfectly even, she told him the undeniable truth. "It's about respect." Later that evening, as Barbara sat peacefully on her porch watching the sky melt into vibrant shades of orange, she realized her anger had entirely evaporated. Her mind was crystal clear. She understood that this conflict was never truly about a missed picnic. It was about the heartbreaking reality that she had become merely useful to her family, rather than genuinely loved by them. But the financial shockwaves were only just beginning to hit the family ecosystem. Soon after Jason's failed call, Emily reached out, and unlike Jason's nervous stammering, Emily's voice was sharp and laced with cold indignation. "Are you seriously punishing us by closing the account?" Emily snapped through the receiver, acting as if she were the victim of a grave and sudden injustice. She accused her mother of being unfair to everyone else in the family by cutting off the funds. Barbara, sitting securely in her newfound power, nearly laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of the statement. "Funny," Barbara replied sharply. "I wasn't invited, so why would everyone else matter more than the one who made sure those bills were paid?" The logic was bulletproof, and Emily, utterly incapable of defending her own cruel actions or accepting responsibility, simply hung up the phone. There was no apology offered, and not a single hint of remorse for the pain they had caused. As the news of the closed bank account quietly circulated, the real unraveling of the family's dependency began to show its face. Barbara started receiving a sudden influx of text messages from extended family members, people she hadn't heard a single word from in ages. Her inbox was suddenly pinging with entitled requests. One message arrived reading, "Hey, Aunt Linda, just wondering if you're still helping with gas cards this summer." Another popped up saying, "Hi, Mom said you might chip in for the airbnb at Lake George." The audacity of relatives who had just happily eaten a catered meal funded by her money at a party she was excluded from was staggering. But Barbara was ready. To each and every request, she coldly copied and pasted the exact same response. "I'm no longer managing family support funds. Please speak to Jason or Emily." She decided to let her children carry the heavy financial weight they had once begged her to hold. She wanted them to have to answer the uncomfortable questions and bear the brunt of being the center of the family's endless demands. If they wanted her to be invisible, she was more than happy to grant their wish in its entirety. However, Barbara wasn't finished dismantling the empire of comfort she had quietly built for them. The shared bank account had been the financial backbone of the family's entire logistical existence. Everything was tied directly to it: their mobile phone plans, their weekly grocery delivery subscriptions, and even the family Hulu and Netflix accounts. Methodically, one by one, Barbara went through her computer and started removing her name, officially canceling the automatic payments that had kept their lives running so smoothly. The real-world impacts hit hard and fast. Jason's phone plan was abruptly disconnected, causing his cell service to stop working right on the day of his big, highly anticipated Zoom pitch. The inconvenience was severe and immediate. Meanwhile, Emily, completely disconnected from her digital comforts, texted her mother in frantic all caps, "Netflix isn't working. Did you do something?" Barbara looked at her phone, her expression calm and resolute. "No, sweetheart," she thought to herself. "You did something." Barbara's actions weren't driven by a malicious thirst for revenge or spite. She simply wanted her children to open their eyes and truly see her. She wanted to stop being viewed as an endless ATM machine or a convenient background figure, and be recognized as their mother and as a vital part of their family. However, the painful truth of the situation had finally dawned on her. If you systematically erase a person from your life for long enough, you might not even recognize them when they finally return with boundaries. For decades, Barbara had been the soft, forgiving place where her children could always land when they fell. But those days were officially over. She was no longer their financial safety net. Now, she was the mirror, forcing them to look directly at their own selfishness and the massive void left behind when you take a devoted mother's love for granted. As the days stretched into a quiet routine, Barbara found herself reflecting deeply on the shrinking world around her. She used to enthusiastically schedule her entire existence around her family's endless needs. She was the devoted mother who stayed up late to bake cookies for school fundraisers, lovingly sent out birthday cards stuffed with crisp $20 bills, and willingly hosted massive Thanksgiving dinners that inevitably left her with terribly sore feet but a wonderfully full heart. Now, her days were completely enveloped in silence, but instead of letting the quiet crush her spirit, she decided to fill that vast space with something entirely new. She couldn't help but remember the painful image she had seen online. She vividly pictured the red checkered tablecloths, her grandkids laughing joyously in the summer sun, and the matching custom shirts worn by a family pretending that the very woman who had held them all together simply didn't exist. Her children likely thought she would just quietly fade away into the background. They arrogantly assumed she would sit alone in her house, drowning in her regrets and mindlessly watching television reruns. But instead of breaking down and surrendering to their cruelty, Barbara pulled out a spiral notebook and began writing a list of names. This time, she wasn't writing their names, she was actively writing her own. Barbara decided it was finally time to host a small, intimate gathering on her own terms. She wanted a reunion of her own kind, filled with people connected to her not just by blood, but by genuine heart. She eagerly invited old colleagues, the kind neighbors who had brought her soup when she was sick, and the dear friends she had met in her widow support group. She even sent an invitation to a former student who had once looked her in the eye and told her that she had completely changed their life. These were the rare individuals who remembered her for who she truly was, not just for the endless financial support and favors she blindly gave. To host this deeply special event, Barbara excitedly booked a beautiful space at the downtown community center. It was the exact same historic building that Jason's wife had once snobbishly dismissed as being far too run down for their modern taste. But Barbara absolutely loved its charming old brick walls and exposed wooden beams. She arranged for a spectacular catering spread featuring real, authentic Southern comfort food: crispy fried chicken, savory collard greens, and warm, buttery biscuits. To fund this beautiful gathering, she didn't touch anything connected to her ungrateful children. She paid for the entire event herself using her own private bank account, one that Jason and Emily never even knew existed. Barbara then carefully printed out beautiful, simple invitations with elegant gold lettering that warmly read, "You are invited to a gathering of gratitude and grace." The rules for her party were wonderfully strict in their simplicity. No RSVP was required, there were absolutely no matching shirts allowed, and she strictly forbade any fake smiles. She spent days lovingly assembling personalized gift bags for her guests, filling each one with a heartfelt handwritten note, a shared photo memory, and a precious little jar of homemade jam. Keeping her newfound boundary completely firm, she didn't post a single word about the event online, and she deliberately did not tell Jason or Emily. They were decidedly not invited. When the highly anticipated day of the gathering finally arrived, it was nothing short of perfect. A warm breeze drifted gently through the air as golden sunlight poured beautifully through the community center's high windows. Her cherished guests arrived one by one, bearing vibrant flowers, warm hugs, and wonderful nostalgic stories. The party wasn't loud, and it certainly wasn't overly grand, but it was profoundly real. At one particularly poignant moment during the afternoon, Mrs. Hill, Barbara's old neighbor from when she lived on East Elwood, wrapped her in a tight, meaningful hug. Mrs. Hill looked deeply at her and said, "Linda, you still have so much love around you. Don't ever let your children convince you otherwise." That single, validating moment of recognition nearly brought Barbara to tears, but she smiled brightly and squeezed her old friend's hand because she knew Mrs. Hill was absolutely right. Barbara realized then and there that she didn't need to pathetically beg for a seat at someone else's table. She had triumphantly built her own. A few quiet days passed after her beautiful gathering. The silence from her children continued. There were no desperate phone calls, no frantic text messages, and certainly no apologies for their cruel behavior. But on a peaceful Thursday afternoon, the jarring ring of Barbara's doorbell suddenly shattered the quiet. When she opened the front door, she wasn't greeted by Jason or Emily. Standing nervously there on her porch was Megan, her 14-year-old oldest granddaughter. Megan was a classic picture of awkward teenage limbs and highly anxious eyes, clutching a small paper bag tightly in her trembling hands. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly, quickly adding a secretive confession. "Mom doesn't know I'm here." Barbara blinked rapidly, her heart instantly catching in her throat at the profound sight of the young girl taking such a massive risk just to see her. As Megan cautiously stepped inside, she looked around Barbara's familiar living room as if it were sacred ground. She sheepishly handed over the small bag and mumbled that she had brought snickerdoodles, proudly noting she had baked them herself using Barbara's old, treasured recipe. When Barbara opened the bag and smiled warmly, she immediately noticed the cookies were a little overbaked. But that simple, incredibly genuine gesture warmed her soul far deeper than anything else had in weeks. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, wrapped in a thick but incredibly soft silence. Finally, Megan bravely looked up and asked the heavy question Barbara knew was lingering on her tongue. "Why weren't you at the reunion?" Barbara closed her eyes for a brief second to steady her racing heart. She wanted to answer truthfully, not to protect herself, but to speak in a delicate way that wouldn't deeply damage the young girl's view of her own parents. "I wasn't invited," Barbara answered simply and honestly. Megan's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as she sputtered, asking why. Giving her granddaughter a small, sad smile, Barbara gently explained that sometimes grown-ups foolishly forget the people who have always been safely in the background, at least until that background suddenly gets very, very quiet. Megan stared at her grandmother for a long, heavy moment before whispering a heartbreaking truth. She confessed that the reunion simply didn't feel right without Barbara there. Megan revealed that her mother, Emily, had dismissively claimed Barbara was simply too busy to attend, but Megan knew in her heart that the flimsy excuse didn't sound like her fiercely devoted grandmother at all. Hearing this incredible display of intuition, Barbara's heart cracked wide open. "You noticed that?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Megan nodded vigorously, nervously biting her lip, and reminded Barbara that she was always the one who faithfully showed up for every single birthday and school play. Megan wonderfully recognized that her grandmother always remembered the exact things she liked, even when Megan herself occasionally forgot. Overwhelmed with absolute love, Barbara reached across the table and took Megan's hand. She looked deeply into the teenager's eyes and told her that she never had to pick sides in this messy family fallout, nor did she have to understand all the complicated adult dynamics right now. She only asked Megan to promise one vital thing: to always pay close attention to how people make her feel, and to strictly observe how they treat the people who supposedly love them. Overcome with overwhelming affection, the very teenager who had been far too cool to even wave goodbye just a year ago leaned in and hugged her grandmother tightly, fiercely holding on like she was a little 5-year-old girl all over again. Megan whispered that she loved her, declaring boldly that even if her parents acted dumb sometimes, she would never, ever forget. The morning after Megan's incredibly healing secret visit, Barbara woke up feeling profoundly lighter. She wasn't entirely healed from the brutal betrayal of her children, but her path forward was suddenly breathtakingly clear. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a real, undeniable sense of power humming fiercely through her bones. It wasn't the kind of loud, aggressive power that desperately shouts for attention. It was the quiet, unshakable kind of power that never needs to ask twice. Deeply touched by her granddaughter's unprompted loyalty and remarkably sharp emotional clarity, Barbara made her most definitive and permanent move yet. She marched over to her file cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were account numbers, important documents, legal letters, and all the tedious paperwork from her years of quietly managing the things no one else in the family cared about. Then, she picked up the phone and made one final, life-altering call to her attorney. He was the exact same lawyer who had carefully drafted her original will 10 years ago, back when Barbara naively believed her biggest life tragedy would simply be passing away before seeing her beloved grandkids graduate. But now, she had a very different, highly specific set of instructions. With a steady, commanding voice, Barbara ordered her attorney to officially and completely update her beneficiaries. She systematically removed her ungrateful children, Jason and Emily, from every single asset they had arrogantly assumed would automatically fall into their greedy laps upon her death. Instead, she redirected her entire life's work, her beautiful home, her substantial pension account, and her lucrative life insurance policy, directly into an ironclad trust set up exclusively for Megan. She added exceptionally strict stipulations, legally ensuring the massive funds would only be accessible when Megan turned 25. and only if she remained in good standing by Barbara's own strict definition, absolutely excluding any input or control from her parents. On the final legal document, Barbara instructed the attorney to add one simple, profoundly powerful note detailing her ultimate reasoning. To the one who showed up. "Hello, I am Kitch, your AI assistant. Here is the final part of your YouTube script, concluding Barbara's journey with a powerful resolution, followed by a valuable lesson for your audience." Word eventually reached Barbara's children about her definitive financial moves. Jason, panicking as his safety nets vanished, sent a frantic email, not a phone call, but an email, complaining that his insurance had lapsed, he had received a fine, and he was demanding to know what Megan had mentioned about a trust. Barbara read the email but chose not to reply, realizing that when people treat you like a stranger, you no longer owe them explanations. Instead, she printed out one final, decisive letter and mailed it directly to both of their homes. In the letter, Barbara laid her boundaries out plainly. She wrote that they had taught her something she never expected to learn this late in life, that love without respect is just quiet cruelty. Because they had chosen to move forward without her, she was officially doing the same. She firmly instructed them not to contact her unless it was for something truly urgent, declaring that she was fine, she was free, and she was entirely finished pretending with grace. It wasn't an act of revenge, but a stark recognition of who they really were and who she had always been until she stopped being convenient. Shortly after mailing her resignation from their toxic dynamic, a completely different kind of letter arrived for Barbara on a rainy Monday. It came in an envelope hand-addressed in neat blue ink, containing a folded piece of paper with a simple sentence written across the top. "Grandma, can I still come over? Megan." Barbara's hands trembled. It wasn't a lazy text message or a social media post designed for sympathy clicks. It was a real letter, sent with purpose, because Megan wanted to make absolutely sure her grandmother knew she was still seen. The following Saturday, Barbara picked Megan up in her old Ford, and the two enjoyed a beautiful afternoon together at the farmer's market. Later, back at the house, Barbara handed her granddaughter a little box. Inside was a shiny key to her home, a symbol of everything the rest of the family had tried to take from her, but couldn't. Barbara looked at the young girl and told her that she never needed to knock again, cementing a bond built on genuine love rather than convenience. The final piece of Barbara's past tried to re-enter her life that same evening when she received a call from an unknown number. It was Frank, her ex-husband, reaching out for the first time in years. He claimed he had heard about what happened at the reunion and offered a belated apology, stating he didn't know the kids would treat her that way. He told her she didn't deserve it and said he would like to make things right. But Barbara was no longer the woman who blindly accepted breadcrumbs. She smiled politely into the receiver and simply said, "Some doors don't open again, Frank." She wished him peace and hung up the phone. She was finally writing her own ending, one built strictly on honesty, respect, and knowing her own worth. A few months later, Barbara hosted a beautiful dinner in her backyard. She was surrounded by genuine friends, kind neighbors, and Megan right by her side, enjoying laughter under string lights and soft music. For the first time, not a single person asked where her children were, and Barbara didn't feel like a single thing was missing. She finally felt full, and most importantly, she felt seen. The valuable lesson for the listener: do not set yourself on fire simply to keep others warm. Barbara's story is a profound reminder that true family is defined by mutual respect and appreciation, not just shared genetics or financial utility. When you spend your entire life being the ultimate fixer and the silent bank for everyone else, people can easily start viewing your generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. The most valuable takeaway here is the power of the quiet pivot. You do not have to engage in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations to protect your peace. When people show you that they only value what you provide rather than who you are, believe them the first time. Take back your energy, set ironclad boundaries, and redirect your resources toward those who genuinely show up for you. Remember, love without respect is indeed just quiet cruelty. It is never too late in life to stop pretending with grace, close the bank of endless favors, and build a brand new table surrounded only by those who truly see your worth. I letter 1 EBFT, K letter 1 EBF thumb. They deliberately excluded me from the reunion they paid for with my bank account. Then I made one final call.